Okay, so I've been using the M4 MacBook Air as my main MacBook for the past 10 months or so, and I've just recently picked up the M5 MacBook Pro to try to replace the Air, and after using it for about 60 days, I have some interesting thoughts about it. So we know that the Pro is more powerful than the Air on equal silicon, so when we're comparing a previous generation M4 MacBook Air to an M5 MacBook Pro, you might think that the comparison is not even close, right? Well, as you probably assumed, it's not that simple, and there's a lot more to this decision than just the specs and just the performance. So let's start with the most obvious difference that could potentially make your decision very simple, and that is the overall design and comfort, more specifically when using these MacBooks for a long period of time, like say 3 to 6 hours straight or longer. So the MacBook Air is paper thin, it's light as a feather, and it's fanless, so it's silent. Meanwhile, the MacBook Pro is thicker, heavier, and louder because of that fan. Now this alone could be enough to justify one over the other. So if you're somebody who's always on the go, if you're always traveling and you're always working away from home, I would say the MacBook Air, for that reason alone, is better because it's so much lighter. If you put it in your backpack, it does not take up near as much space. It's also not nearly as heavy on your back. Also, for the airplane trays on airplanes, the MacBook Air just fits so much better in that small, tight space. It's much better than the MacBook Pro, and also it's fanless. So if you're ever in a quiet environment, you're going to really love the MacBook Air since you don't even hear it running. Meanwhile, the MacBook Pro I think is going to be better for those who have a home office setup. So if you work from home more than you do, on the go, and also if you need just a little bit better performance, the MacBook Pro is going to be the one to go with for that in terms of overall, comfort. Now the color selection is also better on the Air. So if you take a look right here, I have the sky blue one, but also comes in midnight and starlight, whereas the MacBook Pro just comes in the classic colors. So we have silver and space black. But I'm not sure why people don't mention this. If you look closely, you'll see that the MacBook Pro has a slightly different keyboard and it has a little bit more depth than the MacBook Air. So they feel a little bit different to type on, and I personally prefer the feel of the MacBook Pro. It feels more sturdy and higher end. It's really hard to explain unless you've typed on both, simultaneously, but I would say that the keyboard is better on the MacBook Pro, whereas the trackpad is pretty much the same on both. It's nice and large right there, and it's really the best trackpad in the game. However, I have to say that the MacBook Pro has 4 huge advantages over the MacBook Air. Like, I'm somebody who almost always recommends the MacBook Air to somebody looking to get a MacBook. There are 4 big reasons why it might just be worth it to get the MacBook Pro and save yourself the headache at the end of the day. So those 4 things are: number 1, the display. So I personally am fully addicted to the nano texture display. I have it on my M4 MacBook Pro, I have it on my iPad Pro. I plan to get it on every device in the future that I'm going to keep. So I would say the display is a big advantage that the Pro has over the Air. And nano texture basically just reduces the glare and reflections on the screen without a big hit to the color accuracy. So this is huge for working at coffee shops, if you're in an airport lounge, if you're on the plane even, really anywhere where there are a lot of reflections and light, it really comes in handy for that. But it's not just nano texture that makes the MacBook Pro superior, it's also the display itself, because we do have a 120 Hz Liquid Retina XDR mini LED display with 1000 nits of standard brightness. Meanwhile, the MacBook Air only has 500 nits of standard brightness. It does also have Liquid Retina display, but it's not mini LED. And for an Air, it's still very impressive, but since it's not mini LED, it's not going to be as good color-wise as the MacBook Pro. Now, I have to say also, you might have heard 120 Hz, with the MacBook Pro, but honestly, to me, I really never tell a big difference with the refresh rate on MacBooks. So I notice it a lot on the iPhone, but on the MacBook, I would not make my decision based on, 120 Hz. And I would argue that you shouldn't even make your decision overall based on display. Like, yes, it's better on the MacBook Pro, but unless you're mainly using your, MacBook for watching media, it's probably not worth it to choose one over the other just for the display alone. I'd much rather just take the extra money that you would save, like buying a MacBook Air, and spend that money on extra internal storage instead. And speaking of storage, if you never want to run out of storage, especially if you get a base model MacBook, you might want to check out today's sponsor, Clean My Mac. So Clean My Mac spots and removes duplicate files, system cache, and all the unnecessary files that took up over 40 gigabytes on my MacBook. I typically run this Smart Care scan to get an overview of what's eating away at my storage, and it just takes one click to show and then remove those files. So on this panel in the application over here, we have the Cleanup and My Clutter app, the section right here to clear cache and junk files. We have protection to scan for security threats. We have performance to manage background tasks, applications to properly uninstall apps and remove leftover files. We have My Clutter to remove duplicate and large and old files that you may no longer need. And then the cloud cleanup feature is also pretty handy, since this does clean up all the unnecessary files in your iCloud, Google Drive, or OneDrive accounts. And I love how this application shows up in the menu bar, and it gives you quick access to things like how much space I have left on my drive, the CPU and RAM pressure and temperatures, and so much more. Like, it's perfect for cleaning and also just maintaining my Mac. So yeah, Clean My Mac makes my life easier, and it saves me a lot of time and storage space by finding and removing files that I really didn't even know existed. So if you want to try Clean My Mac free for 7 days, click my link down in the description below, and if you use my code Brandon20, you'll get 20% off. Now let's talk about one area that is so underrated when it comes to choosing between the MacBook Air and the MacBook Pro, and to me, I think it's probably the biggest difference in these two, aside from the overall, weight and feel in the hands, and that is the connectivity. So the MacBook Pro has 3 Thunderbolt 4 ports on both sides. This is the big, difference here. On the MacBook Air, you only have the 2 Thunderbolt ports on the same side. They're over on the left-hand side. Now, also the MacBook Pro has an HDMI port and an SD card slot, which is big for me. So if you're a creative, if you do any type of creative work whatsoever and you need like an SD card slot, or if you need an HDMI port for like displays or anything like that, this should be, the decision maker right here. Like, the MacBook Pro is far and away better for connectivity, and you also won't run out of ports nearly as easily as you do on the Air. And also, you won't have to drag a cord all the way around to the left-hand side, because you have a port on the right side as well on the MacBook Pro. You have it on both sides. Now, speaking of creative work, we also have to talk about the microphone inside, because the microphone also makes a big difference. So this is something I didn't really, comprehend. I didn't really notice how big of a deal this was until really just the past few months when I've been on FaceTime a lot. Like, if I'm on FaceTime on my computer and I'm far away from the computer, the MacBook Pro, microphone picks up my voice so much better than the MacBook Air, specifically with voice isolation turned on. So this is a big difference. Now, I don't know anybody who uses the built-in microphone on a Mac to like record videos. I'm sure some people out there do it, and this is even more of a advantage that the Pro has, because the Pro does have studio quality 3 mic array with high signal to noise ratio and directional beamforming, whereas the Air just has regular 3 mic array with directional beamforming. So this is going to be noticeable if you are using the built-in microphone for voice recordings, or more importantly for video calls like FaceTime or Zooms. Okay, so here is a video and, more importantly, a microphone test on the M5 MacBook Pro. So we're testing to see how the audio quality is, and even if the video quality is any different from the M4 MacBook Air. And now we are testing the M4 MacBook Air to see if the microphone is much worse or basically the same as the M5 MacBook Pro when it comes to audio quality, and also once again to see if the video quality is any different between these two. Okay, so what if you're not a creative? What if you're not somebody who uses the microphone at all on your MacBook? Let's talk about these speakers, because this is something that everybody is going to use, and I have to say that the MacBook Pro speakers are also far better than the MacBook Air. So whether that's for voice, whether that's for dialogue like in a show, or whether that's for loud explosions in a show, like, the depth and the overall soundstage of the MacBook Pro is going to be far better than the MacBook Air, and it's something that you'll notice pretty much instantly. Now, we briefly mentioned this a little bit earlier, but I want to expand on the performance between these two, the performance difference between these two, because you might be thinking, isn't there a massive difference in performance between a previous generation MacBook Air and a current generation MacBook Pro? And honestly, the answer is not really, at least not for most people out there watching this video. So both of these MacBooks come with 16 gigs of RAM, and you can spec that up to 32 gigs, but the MacBook Pro starts at 512 gigs of storage, whereas the Air starts at 256 gigs of storage. Now, the MacBook Pro M5 also has nearly 30% higher unified memory bandwidth, so it's going to be faster there as well. But as far as CPU and GPU specs go, like the nerdy stuff, the M5 is going to be a good bit better than the M4. So it's 15% 20% faster multi-threaded CPU performance, 30% faster overall graphics performance, 45% faster ray tracing performance, and it does also have the integrated neural accelerators in every GPU core, whereas the M4 doesn't have any integrated neural accelerators. So if you're somebody who does a lot of AI, somebody who does a lot of like AI workflows or machine learning, any type of on-device AI, work, obviously, the M5 MacBook Pro is going to be the one to go with, but you're probably not even watching this video. You're probably not even considering a MacBook Air if you're somebody who does something like that. You're probably going for the M4 Pro or M4 Max chips. Like I mentioned earlier, if you're going for top performance, I honestly wouldn't even look at the M5 MacBook Pro. Like, go for the M4 Pro or M4 Max because there's going to be a much wider gap in performance, from the MacBook Air to one of those chips, or wait for the M5 Pro or M5 Max. And keep in mind that the MacBook Pro does have a fan inside, so it will run cooler, and it's also going to be less prone to, thermal throttling, whereas the MacBook Air is more prone to thermal throttling, but it is going to be silent. So for me personally, I like having a silent machine, so I do love the fact that the MacBook Air is always going to be just a silent beast. And just to elaborate a little bit on the performance, I have edited multiple videos of mine on my MacBook Air M4, and it's done just fine. Like, it's, when I don't have many effects or anything crazy going on in the background, it does run just fine. I'm able to export just fine. However, again, I do have to have my external SSD hooked up because I need that extra storage space. So 256 gigs is just simply not enough for most people unless you have an external drive connected, which is what I personally do. So, for that workflow, and I also edited Photoshop and, did the AI generation in Photoshop as well, it ran just fine for me. Like, obviously the MacBook Pro, I have also used that as well. Obviously that does perform a good bit better, but that's not a big enough difference to, justify the price difference. So to me, the bigger difference again is going to be the port selection and the weight and the feel and where you actually use your MacBook on a daily basis. But of course, if you need the extra horsepower, if you're somebody who's like an engineer, if you're a developer and you have a big code base, if you're somebody who's into machine learning and things like that, so you need the extra horsepower, then obviously the M5 MacBook Pro is going to be the one to go with, and you have those extra ports as well, and the extra, display port as well with that HDMI, since you're most likely going to be using multiple monitors. So it really just depends on, which category you fall in. Now, here's something that surprised me a little bit, and that is the battery life. So the M5 MacBook Pro is the battery king. Don't get me wrong. The MacBook Pro is going to have the better battery life, every single time. At least for me, it's gotten at least 2 to 3 hours more battery life than the MacBook Air. But what surprised me is when these are under load, the MacBook Air does not drain nearly as fast as I thought it would, especially after using this for quite a while now, almost a year now. The battery life is still tremendous on my MacBook Air. So yes, the MacBook Pro lasts a little bit longer, but the MacBook Air is just so much more portable. And the fact that it doesn't have a fan, and when you're doing Final Cut Pro, you would think that it would just eat away so much more at the battery life, but it really doesn't. So this is an area, again, that I would not really make a decision based off of because the battery life is pretty close. And then here's where things get tough. So let's talk about the pricing. So the MacBook Air is currently $749 on Amazon, whereas the M5 MacBook Pro is currently $1,349 on Amazon. So that is a $600 difference. Now, if you do upgrade to 512 gigs of storage on the MacBook Air, it's still going to be $400 cheaper than the MacBook Pro. So let's just say $400 to $600 cheaper the MacBook Air is compared to the MacBook Pro. So should you spend an extra $400 to $600 on the MacBook Pro, or just stick to the MacBook Air and save some money? So I would say if you're a student or if you work in an office and you mainly use your Mac for web browsing, web applications, coding, or any type of professional office applications, I would save your money and just get the MacBook Air. Like, the added portability, the lightweight feel is also just a massive benefit of the MacBook Air. I love taking the MacBook Air with me to go. It's always the one I reach for. And when I say on the go, this also includes in the house. Like, when I'm bringing my laptop around with me, MacBook Air is so much more convenient and light. It doesn't matter how jacked you are, it's still going to be much lighter to carry the Air than the Pro. And again, even if you do light creative work, if you do light coding and things like that, MacBook Air is going to be perfectly fine for you. I would not worry about the performance at all. Now, on the flip side, you should get the MacBook Pro if you're somebody who creates content full time, or if you're somebody who does a lot of work with AI or machine learning or like local LLMs, or if you're coding like big projects. If you have a big code base in Xcode, MacBook Pro is going to be worth the extra cost over time. And again, that fan is going to help with those intensive work sessions. And also, I can't keep forgetting this, nano texture is such a nice bonus option with the MacBook Pro. And I also can't forget to mention the port selection and the SD card slot. Like, those things are way more important in general, in my opinion, compared to just performance overall. But here's where things get even a little bit more tricky, because the M5 MacBook Pro was honestly such a minor upgrade over the M4 MacBook Pro. Like, we didn't even get Wi-Fi 7. Really nothing major was changed aside from just the chip. So I would argue if you don't do anything with AI at all, because that's really where the big benefits of the M5 chip are, I would just look for an M4 MacBook Pro and save a little bit of money there as well. Like, even the M4 Pro or M4 Max are really solid machines. I would maybe look at those instead of the M5, especially if you're somebody who needs the most performance out of your machine. So you might be wondering then, what am I doing? So I'm personally going to be returning my M5 MacBook Pro and sticking with my M4 MacBook Pro, but I'm only going to be bringing that with me when I'm doing a work trip, when I'm going to like CES or some of these other trips where I need that extra horsepower for video editing and I need those extra port slots. I'm going to be bringing my M4 MacBook Pro with me there, and also the nano texture display helps a lot on the go. But for around the house and when I'm doing light work here, if I'm going to a coffee shop to work, I'm going to be using my M4 MacBook Air for that. Even if I have to do light editing, like light editing work while I'm there, MacBook Air is good enough to knock that out. And of course, for web browsing around the house, like FaceTime calls, just things like that, MacBook Air, hands down, all the way. So yeah, I hope this video helped you out. Let me know down in a comment below which one you would choose. Is it the MacBook Pro or is it the MacBook Air? Let me know your thoughts and why down there in the comments below. So anyways, guys, thanks for watching, and I'll see you soon.